Hello, I'm Del Platinum and I will be explaining how I use Hotcues. Hotcues are markers you can set on your tracks in your preferred DJ software that you can then typically jump to using the performance pads on your mixer or controller. There are many uses for Hotcues. You can set them to parts of a beat to enable finger drumming. You can set them on note changes to allow you to mess around with the song structure. You can set them to the end of a part of a song you don't want to play, like skipping a breakdown. You can set them to part of a song you do want to play, possibly more than once. How I use them is almost purely as a visual guide for blending tracks. In the days before DVS, I would always try to line up the final bar of the outgoing record with the drop of the incoming record. This took a lot of practice and really knowing your tunes back to front. In the digital era, this is a far easier task, and this is good because there are hundreds of times more tunes available since the 90s, and learning them all to that degree is a full-time job, and I already have a full-time job. So I use Hotcues as visual markers as a shortcut. It also means I can pay slightly less attention to the mixing while I'm streaming, so I can interact with viewers and the other tasks you need to do while live streaming, like pressing buttons on your stream deck. Most of the Hotcues I set are done by eye, and I usually set my cues on a batch of new tracks while listening to something else. I then throw them all into a crate and make my first listen into a live streaming session. This can lead to some surprises, some good, some less so. There is a basic principle I follow. Q1, the red one, is what I consider to be the beginning of the track. This may not be the literal beginning of the track. Q3, the blue one, is what I consider to be the best time in the track to mix out the previous track, which is usually the first major drop. Q number 8, the purple one, is what I consider to be the last active bar of the track, which is literally where I'm going to stop playing it. The overall target then is for purple on the outgoing track to line up with blue on the incoming track. And from that I can work out where to start the incoming track at the red marker. The other Hotcues I use are just extra visual guides. Q2, the orange one, is a useful midpoint between 1 and 3, ideally 64 or 128 bars, 30 or 60 seconds, before Q3, but if there is a phrase change in between 1 and 3, feel free to set orange on that, or if a vocal comes in, you can mark that instead. It's not critical to the theory like Qs 1, 3 and 8. Q4 is used if the drop is offset from the regular 32 bar scheme, so it's rarely used. In some cases I will use it as a second start point for tracks that are too long. In those cases I normally mark the start of the first breakdown. Qs 5, 6 and 7 are 192, 128 and 64 bars before the end, purple. At 128 BPM that's 1 minute 30, 1 minute and 30 seconds before the purple marker. As a side note, if you only have 4 Qs available, like if you're using Serato Lite, you'll need to adjust this method a little, but it's essentially the same. I would use Hotcues 1 and 2 for the start and the first drop, Q3 at the 128 bar from the end mark, and Hotcue number 4 for the end of the track. Here it is in action. Red is set at the beginning of the track, blue is at the first drop, purple is at the end. On the incoming track, red to blue is 128 bars, which is a minute at this tempo. On the outgoing track, if we work back from purple 128 bars, that gives us magenta. So basically we want red and magenta to match up, which will make blue and purple match up, which is our goal. So we release the incoming track at the magenta mark, blue and purple will line up perfectly, and you can go and grab a coffee, or fiddle with EQs or effects to make for a nice blend. And there you go. Setting up the Hotcues is quite simple once you've done it a few times, but here's how I do it. Before we start, make sure your beat jump is set to 32 bars, clear out any loops or Hotcues you might have already, and let's go. First off, make sure your beat grids are lined up, set the first cue at the first active bar of the song, then we set a 16 bar loop, because I like using loops to beat match. Save that loop and then turn the loop off so it doesn't break everything else. Now we use the beat jump to jump forward 32 bars at a time until we get to, or near to, the first drop. And we set the blue cue, number 3, here. Now we can beat jump back 32 bars at a time until we either reach a halfway point between 1 and 3, or an interesting transition like a breakdown or the start of a vocal. And that's the beginning of the tune sorted. Now we go to the very end of the tune and find the end of the last bar. Sometimes it's obvious, other times not so much. This one's obvious. Set cue number 8, the purple one, here. And this is the easy bit. Beat jump back twice, set Hotcue 7. Beat jump back twice, set Hotcue 6. Beat jump back twice, set Hotcue 5. And we're done. This tune should be ready to mix into another tune, providing the other tune is set up in the same way. And that's the main guts of it. That's also the most straightforward example. Where tunes are just split into 64 or 128 bar phrases, it's easy street, and basically barely necessary as you can do it by eye with just a little practice. But from a quick eyeball of the waveform, particularly in Serato, it's hard to tell if it's going to be an easy one, so I just put the markers down anyway, as it doesn't take long and there's no real downside. Where a tune adds an extra bar or two just before the drop, I ignore that. It's a conscious choice by the artist to put that in, so I go with them. I will still mark the blue at the 32 bar line and use yellow to mark the actual drop. I still always line up blue with purple there. That way the outgoing tune will end in the right place and allow the extra bars to do their thing before the drop. Likewise, if the markers for cues 5, 6 and 7 don't actually fall on 32 bar boundaries or phrase changes, I will ignore them. A tune like this one, a remix of Oh Yeah by Yellow, has 65 bar phrases. This will catch you out if you don't pay attention, but my markers will still be at the 196, 128 and 64 bar gaps from the end of the tune, and I just adjust my mixing to suit the breaks and the drops being out of place in the outgoing tune. Or I can just wait until the 7th cue before I bring in the next tune for a quick 30-second blend. I have a couple of tracks that have sub 4 bar pauses, which will throw off your grids and your mixes. Again, ignore it. The last 4 markers should always be 192, 128 and 64 bars from the end. Your goal is primarily to line up blue and purple, so if you put 5, 6 and 7 in the wrong places, you're going to have a bad time. And there we have it. Hopefully this has been fairly easy to follow, at least easier than it was to put together. If you liked it, click the appropriate thing. If you didn't like it, click the other appropriate thing. If you disagree and or think you may have a better way of doing this, I'm all ears, so leave a comment. And if you'd like me to go into more detail on any of it, also leave a comment. Thanks, people. Feeple.